Welcome to World Epic History. Today, we explore the rise and fall of the Khmer Rouge, a regime that shattered Cambodia's peace and left deep scars in its history. In 1975, Pol Pot's regime took control, imposing a brutal vision of agrarian socialism that led to the deaths of nearly 2 million Cambodians. Join us as we uncover how this regime came to power, the horrors it inflicted, and its eventual fall. A tragic chapter in history that must never be forgotten. The Khmer Rouge was a brutal regime that left an indelible mark on Cambodia's history. In the 1970s, Cambodia was on the brink of a revolution, its people suffering under years of political turmoil. Amidst this instability, a radical communist movement, led by Pol Pot, rose to power. The Khmer Rouge sought to transform Cambodia into an agrarian utopia, purging the nation of what they considered corrupt elements of society. What followed was a period of unimaginable suffering, where millions of Cambodians lost their lives. Pol Pot, born Salith Sar, had a vision for Cambodia that was deeply rooted in radical Marxist ideology. He believed that the country's future lay in returning to a simpler, agrarian society. In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge took control of Phnom Penh, the capital, and immediately began implementing their vision. They forced people from the cities into rural labor camps to work the land, believing this would purify the nation. What followed was the systematic dismantling of Cambodia's cities, economy, and culture. When the Khmer Rouge entered Phnom Penh, the capital city was emptied. The population, which had once been over 2 million, was forcibly relocated to the countryside. Families were separated, and millions of people were sent to work in labor camps. In the process, they faced brutal conditions, including starvation, disease, and constant threats of violence. The forced evacuation of Phnom Penh marked the beginning of Cambodia's darkest era. The Khmer Rouge established what are now known as the Killing Fields, where an estimated 1.5 to 2 million people were killed. This period of genocide was marked by extreme cruelty, where men, women, and children were tortured, executed, and buried in mass graves. Anyone perceived as an enemy of the regime, including intellectuals, doctors, and teachers, was targeted. The Killing Fields are a haunting reminder of the brutality and scope of the Cambodian genocide. One of the key features of the Khmer Rouge rule was its targeted elimination of intellectuals. Anyone with an education, even those who simply wore glasses, was seen as a threat to the new order. This brutal purge sought to wipe out Cambodia's cultural and intellectual heritage. Teachers, doctors, and even musicians were rounded up, tortured, and executed. The loss of these individuals had a devastating impact on the country's future. The Khmer Rouge employed horrific methods of execution. Victims were often bludgeoned to death with tools such as hoes or shot in the head. Some were taken to remote locations and forced to dig their own graves. The fear and suffering that permeated this period are difficult to comprehend, but it remains an essential chapter in understanding the true horror of Cambodia's genocide. Pol Pot was the figurehead of the Khmer Rouge, but the regime was run by a small circle of leaders. They were responsible for overseeing the purges, the forced labor, and the genocide that devastated Cambodia. As the country fell deeper into chaos, the Khmer Rouge leadership became more paranoid, ruling with an iron fist and continuing to eliminate any perceived threats. Under the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia became isolated from the international community. Pol Pot's regime broke diplomatic ties, particularly with the United States and Western nations, and withdrew from the global stage. The country became a closed society, its people kept in the dark about the outside world. With no outside aid and the regime's policies of forced labor and starvation, Cambodia's suffering deepened. The killing fields were not only a place of execution, but also a symbol of systematic extermination. The victims were often taken to remote areas, far from the eyes of the outside world. Entire families were murdered, and entire villages were wiped out. The Khmer Rouge left behind a country decimated by fear, death, and trauma. Mass graves still dot the landscape as chilling reminders of the atrocities committed. With forced labor and the destruction of the economy, Cambodia plunged into widespread poverty. The Khmer Rouge abolished money and private property, which led to severe food shortages. Starvation and disease became rampant across the country. People were dying not only from violence, but also from malnutrition and the absence of basic medical care. The entire population was pushed to the brink of survival. By 1979, Cambodia had reached the breaking point. The Khmer Rouge's power was beginning to unravel. The regime had alienated neighboring Vietnam, which had suffered from Khmer Rouge attacks along the border. In December 1978, Vietnam launched a military intervention, toppling Pol Pot's regime and liberating Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge fled into the jungle, but their reign of terror had come to an end. Pol Pot and other Khmer Rouge leaders escaped in the jungle after their downfall. For years, they hid in remote regions, while Cambodia began its long process of recovery. Pol Pot's reign may have ended, but the scars left on the Cambodian people would take decades to heal. The world watched as Cambodia tried to rebuild, but the trauma from the Khmer Rouge era remained fresh in the collective memory. After the fall of the Khmer Rouge, the world sought justice for the atrocities committed. It wasn't until the 2000s that the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, ECCC, was established to prosecute the leaders of the regime. In 2010, the trial of the Khmer Rouge leaders began, but many of those responsible for the genocide had already died. Despite this, the trial became an important step in holding the regime accountable. In the aftermath of the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia faced a monumental task, rebuilding a society that had been torn apart by war, genocide, and fear. The country's infrastructure had been destroyed, and millions of lives had been lost. Reconciliation was difficult, and the scars of the past lingered. The Cambodian people had to rebuild their lives from the ground up, while the world watched in both horror and sympathy. Today, Cambodia still struggles to heal from the wounds left by the Khmer Rouge. The genocide is a dark chapter in the country's history that continues to shape its identity. Memorials like the Killing Fields serve as reminders of the horrors that occurred, ensuring that the victims are never forgotten. The memory of the Khmer Rouge is kept alive by survivors, educators, and historians, passing the story of this tragedy to future generations. Despite the unimaginable loss and suffering, Cambodia has shown remarkable resilience. The country has rebuilt its economy, and Phnom Penh is once again a bustling city. Tourism has become a significant industry, with people visiting Cambodia's historical sites to learn about its tragic past. While much has been done to recover, the road to full healing remains long. However, the spirit of the Cambodian people endures, and they continue to move forward, determined to never forget. The Khmer Rouge's legacy extends beyond Cambodia. The world was forced to reckon with the atrocities of the regime, which led to stronger international human rights laws. The genocide prompted discussions on how the world should address crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg trials of World War II had set a precedent, and the Khmer Rouge trials continued this legacy of justice, though imperfectly. To understand the rise of the Khmer Rouge, one must look at the ideological framework that underpinned their actions. Pol Pot and his comrades believed in a radical form of communism that sought to eliminate class distinctions by forcing people into collective farming. This ideology was grounded in a disdain for intellectualism, urbanization, and any form of perceived corruption. It was an ideology that led to mass murder and unimaginable suffering. Cambodia's post-Khmer Rouge era is marked by a slow but steady recovery. The country has made great strides in rebuilding its infrastructure, economy, and institutions. However, the psychological scars of the genocide remain. Cambodia's future is one of reconciliation, education, and remembrance. The country must continue to heal and grow, but it does so with the knowledge that its dark past should never be forgotten. As Cambodia continues to rebuild, it faces the challenge of remembering its tragic past while moving forward into a brighter future. The Khmer Rouge's reign of terror may be over, but its lessons are as relevant as ever. It is through remembering the past that Cambodia can ensure that such horrors never happen again. The strength of the Cambodian people lies in their ability to honor the victims and rise from the ashes of genocide.